The URC is about to go on break for a month and teams will be desperate to do so on the back of a win. My name's Mark, let's talk rugby. Rounds like these can often be overlooked because, big names are away with their national teams over the November period, but 4 or 5 points here counts the same as in any other round of the competition, and it's actually a great time. Teams that take these games seriously are the ones, it can make that difference between whether it's, you're looking for a home playoff place, a spot in the playoffs altogether, or just to finish as high up the league as you can. This is an important round of this competition, and to underscore that, we look at the first game of the weekend. We had a massive game last week. I think this is a massive game as well. Glasgow Warriors versus Vodacom Bulls. So you got champions from a couple of years ago against, perennial finalists in the Bulls. And it should be, a really cracking game. It is on Friday, 24th of October, 7:45 kickoff. That's Ireland and UK time. And it's in Scotstoun Stadium. So these two teams, pretty good form and very similar form as well, starting off the season. So you got Glasgow. They started off with a win at home against the Sharks by 16 points and kind of blew that score out towards the end. Then a narrow defeat away to Benetton. After that, then beat the Dragons comprehensively and followed up with another comprehensive win, against Ospreys. So on a nice little run of form now for them. Onto the Bulls then. Started off brilliantly at home. Beat the Ospreys, scored 53 points, but also conceded 40. Then they beat Leinster 39-31, and had to come back in the end as well, because Leinster got out to a lead, or Bulls got out to a lead. Leinster got back over the top of them, but then Bulls able to respond after that. And then a pretty, abject performance compared to how they started the season when they went to Ulster, losing 28-7 in that game. And then finally, last week then, beat Connacht by a point. As I said in the review of that game, some Connacht fans probably will feel aggrieved by some of the decisions made in the game, but I think that the Bulls were worth their win in the end, that narrow win. So both teams, 3 wins out of 4 so far this season. And, one of these teams is going to, finish this round up there at the pointy end of the table, and the other team probably starting to fall back into the clutches of kind of the mid-table scramble. So I think important game for both of these teams. The fact that Glasgow are at home, though, I think gives them the edge, and I'm going to go for a Glasgow win in that game. So that's the only Friday night game we have, and then the other 7 games happening on Saturday, 25th of October. So first of all, we have a 12:45 kickoff. It is Lions versus Ulster, and this is at Ellis Park. So, should be a decent game of rugby. You got the Lions, who up until last week hadn't won a game, got their first home game, they get a win. Ulster, they've only played 3 games this season, but they've won all 3. So one of only 4 teams unbeaten so far this season, and they're going to want to keep that run going. But the Lions are going to want to kind of back up that win that they produced last week as well. So Lions starting out, come up to Europe, losing to Cardiff, then 2-point loss to Zebre. I think there was 22-20 in that game. And then they lost comprehensively to Benetton the week after that. And then last week then, at home, beat the Scarlets, who are winless at the bottom of the table, by 11 points. But at that stage, both those teams were winless, so one of them was going to come away with the win, and it was the Lions that did and deserved that as well. In contrast, Ulster, as I said, played 3 games so far. So started off beat the Dragons by 42-21, so double scores on that. Then had the game again in Edinburgh called off because of the storm. Then back to Belfast and they beat the Vodacom Bulls by 28 points to 7. And last week then they beat the Sharks by 8 points. And that was away in South Africa as well. So already, whatever happens at this game, I think it's been, a successful South African tour for Ulster. Obviously, I'd love to make it 2 wins out of 2 on that tour. It could be absolutely amazing and would show the steps that this squad has made, because they really have come on this season. Last season we saw kind of signs where there was some improvement there, but it wasn't like completely forward momentum for them. Like there was kind of, that kind of thing where you've got a coach in there, second season, still transitioning with the players, and you see some good stuff and some not so good stuff. And you would feel at this stage, Richie Murphy's philosophy should really be bedded into that squad now. And it feels like it has. Gonna be looking for another good performance here in this one. And I think the good thing for Ulster is that they've got a good group of young players who've come through, but they've recruited well as well too. So like Werner Koch, so influential in that win last week against his former team, the Sharks. Sharks who he played for last season and was brilliant for the Sharks last season, brilliant for Ulster against the Sharks last week. And that kind of blend of bringing youth in and then also recruiting well really has helped Ulster. And, in this one, generally, when it is a South African team playing at home, I'll back the South African team because it's very rare that teams win in South Africa. But this one, it's very close, and I'm actually going to edge towards an Ulster win in this one instead, but it's going to be tight, and it's probably going to be one of those where, whoever loses the game may actually end up with 2 bonus points. So try bonus point and losing bonus point as well. But I'm going to edge on the side of Ulster in that one. So then we're on to then the 3 o'clock kickoff, and that is Hollywood Bet Sharks versus Scarlets. And this one is at Hollywood Bet's Kings Park. So you got 2 teams here, winless, and there are only 3 teams who haven't won so far this season. That's going to be, it should become 2, unless there's a draw in this game and it stays at 3. But one of these teams you would imagine is going to win this game and leave the other teams still searching for their first win. So the Sharks, as I said, they come up to Europe and you would have expected them to do better than they did. In fairness, performance-wise in the first game against Glasgow, they weren't terrible. And again, it was only kind of that last 10 minutes where the score kind of blew out. So 16-point defeat looks a lot worse than the performance was. But then they had that draw against the Dragons, 17-all. Yes, the conditions were very bad, but still, again, I've said it many times, I think everybody would consider that to be a banker win for the Sharks. So not to get that, definitely a blow. Then they go against, a Leinster team who still hadn't won in the season. And, so an opportunity for them to maybe catch Leinster a little bit cold. But apart from the Sharks, their scrum was absolutely immense in that game. Everything else was very poor, and Leinster beat them fairly comprehensively in the end. Then last week against Ulster, they have their first home game of the season. Good chance to kind of reset things and get that win on the board. But Ulster played so well, and unfortunately the Sharks, still in search of that first win of the season. So they have 1 draw from 4 games so far this season. And then we look at Scarlets. Scarlets have only played 3 games because their game against Connacht was called off on the same weekend that the Edinburgh Ulster game was called off as well for the same reason as well, the same storm. So started off, bit of a damp squib really at home against Munster, losing by 13 points at home. And that was probably from Munster their best performance until last week so far this season. And then followed up then with, very poor, I think it was 34-0 at home against the Stormers. So now at that stage, you're really starting to worry for them, because a team who had a very good season last season, finished 8th in the league, made it to the playoffs, going to be in the Champions Cup this year as well. And again, you would have hoped that they would have kicked on a little bit from last year, where they showed how competitive they could be, how dogged they could be as well, staying in games and having just that, having that kind of toughness to beat. And that's completely evaporated for them, unfortunately. Then last weekend, they lose against the Lions by 11 points. So obviously the start of their South African tour, and, maybe probably a little bit improvement in terms of performance over the other two games, but, it hasn't really been a high bar, honestly, for them this season. So gonna have to improve a lot. I don't see them improving enough, though, to beat even the Sharks team who haven't won so far this season. And the Sharks, this is their second bite of the cherry, as it were, that, they had that chance against Leinster, who hadn't won and couldn't take it. Now they've got the chance against the Scarlets, and I think they will take it this time. So I'm going to go for a Sharks win in that one, and probably a bonus point win as well. Hopefully, though, an improvement from Scarlets, and then over that kind of international period, we should see the coaches getting a hold of the squad and starting to fix some of those issues, because it looks like, unless there's some kind of miracle, they're going to be rooted to the bottom of the table going into that international break, and haven't even secured a single match point so far this season. So, got a lot to do. And I don't think it's going to get much better for them on Saturday. Okay, on to the next set of games. So we got 3 games that all kick off at 5:30. The first is Leinster versus Zebre. This is at the Aviva Stadium. And, Leinster have been very poor this season. They've had one win, and, started off 35-0 against the Stormers. You're thinking, okay, not a great start to the season. Then they produce, a better display against the Bulls, but still lose. And they don't get a losing bonus point either. They lost by 8 points. Then they get home, and people are thinking, okay, they've got South Africa out of the way. Now they're going to get back to regular Leinster and go on a winning run. And it looked like maybe that could be the case when, they beat the Sharks 31-5 and looked fairly good in that game, other than, again, the scrum was under pressure throughout the game. Then last week, got absolutely humped by Munster, 31 points to 14. Leinster started out, got the first try, were looking good, and then Munster just took control from about 15 minutes on. Leinster only getting their second try, in the clock in the red after 18 minutes at the end of the game. And yeah, Munster just looks so much better than Leinster. Leinster lacked physicality, lacked leadership, lacked any kind of urgency as well. And one thing I'd say is almost in Leinster's favour for this game is that the players that played last week, the bulk of them hadn't played because they were away with the Lions, so they came back in for that big game last week. Some of them did come in the week before, the likes of Tyke Furlong, but the bulk of those players only come back for that Munster game, and now they're off again with Ireland. So for me, as a Leinster fan, it feels like Leinster are going back to the regular team. I see the likes of, whether it's Deegan, Deeney, Scott Penny, Fintan Gunn, etc., those guys being the regular Leinster squad. And the guys who are in the Ireland team just kind of come in and out now and again during the season. But it's these guys that we see more often than not through the rest of the season. Like hopefully, the likes of Alex Soroka, who's actually been playing. He played against Munster as well and actually looked one of the better Leinster players in that game. But the likes of him, then you got Slimani as well there. Like, so, that kind of core of that team that plays generally week in, week out, other than when those big players come back from Ireland, they feel like a more playing in a blue shirt at least. I think Ireland is a very different thing, but for Leinster playing in a blue shirt, that feels like a more cohesive team for Leinster. Probably they've shown really when they went down to South Africa, not good enough to challenge the really top teams, but good enough to get results, especially at home. And, I think that's what they'll be relying on in this one. Zebre had a fantastic start to the season. Started off, first of all, beating Edinburgh by 3 points, late penalty, securing that win. Then they beat the Lions by 2 points in the next game. So 2 wins out of 2 for them, flying high in the league. Hasn't been so good on the travel since then. Lost 24-0 against Ospreys in the next game and really didn't fire a shot in that game. And then they lost at home then by 18 points to the Stormers last time out. And the Stormers have just been on fire since the start of the season. So even though Zebre have been competitive at home, kind of felt going into the game, the Stormers probably will have too much of them. Now they have a chance to get a very famous win. And if they did, the crisis that everyone's saying Leinster are in at the minute would deepen immensely. There would be calls for heads to roll and stuff like that, I think. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility. You have to consider that. But I do think Leinster, again, with what I feel like is the core team, especially in the URC, out, I think Leinster will win the game. I do think there will be some hiccups in the game, though. And, you're going to see Zebre maybe getting an early score and putting the cat amongst the pigeons. But I think that the regular Leinster team are more used to having to fight for wins compared to the more illustrious, colleagues who are away with Ireland at the minute. And it kind of shows as well. It feels like that team can, adapt more on the field than the main guys can. So we'll see what happens, but I think it is going to be a Leinster win in that one. Okay, on to the next one then, and that is Benetton versus Stormers. Again, a 5:30 kickoff, and this is at the Stadio Monego. And looking at this one, so you have a team who've had an okay start to the season versus a team who've just been flying. So Benetton, away from home, not brilliant. At home, very good. Started off, went to Connacht, lost by 11 points. Didn't really look like they were in the game in that one. Then they got home. They beat Glasgow. Had to wood over Glasgow, especially at home for a while now. Then they beat the Lions comprehensively by 26 points. Then they go on the road again, lose by 43 points away to Edinburgh. So it's been kind of Jekyll and Hyde for them, home and away performances. So we'd expect a better performance at home. But again, they're against the Stormers team who are absolutely flying. So the Stormers started out by beating Leinster by 35, backed it up then by beating Ospreys by 16. That was 26-10 in that one. Then they go on their travels. They beat Scarlets 34-0 away from home. And then they beat Zebre last week by 18 points. So those Stormers, confidence sky high for them. And, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a closer game than maybe a lot of the ones that the Stormers have had this season. But I think that confidence that they do have, that's permeating that squad is going to be enough to bring them a victory. So I think it's going to be a Stormers win, but maybe you're going to see Benetton, another one of those games, or maybe Benetton pick up 2 bonus points in the game, depending on whether it's high scoring or not. But yeah, I'm going to go for a Stormers win in that one. And then the final 5:30 kickoff on Saturday of those 3 is Dragons versus Ospreys. And this one is at Rodney Parade. So, you've got 2 teams not in great form at the minute, like they're both in the bottom 4 of the league. You have Dragons, who started off by, comprehensively beaten by Ulster. Then they get to draw against the Sharks. Then, hockeyed by Glasgow. Then, competitive against Cardiff last week and got themselves a losing bonus point, but still another loss for them. Then Ospreys, they started out, competitive in South Africa, honestly, more competitive than Leinster, where they lose 53-40 against the Bulls, then 26-10 against the Stormers. So you're seeing, that there is a bit of an edge to their game, and, you feel like if they can get home, they can probably get a win. And that's what happens. They beat Zebre 24-0. Looks like, okay, well, they've steadied the ship a little bit. And then they go away to Glasgow and they get beaten by, 25-26 points last weekend. So, one good result, I would say, but also 3, one good performance and 2 decent performances so far. But the worst performance they've had this season has been last week. So that's a bit of a worry for them. And, Glasgow had one of their better performances so far this season against Cardiff, last week. So maybe in terms of current form, very current form, maybe a little bit closer. Ospreys, again, though, you would think they would be, thinking, we should be able to go there and win. But start of last season, the first round of last season, Ospreys coming off, having made the playoffs, that miracle, last 2 rounds of the season before, where they had whatever it was, a 2% chance to make the playoffs, and they did it. Coming into the next season, must have been, a good atmosphere around Ospreys at that time. Lots of confidence, and they lose to Dragons. And, it may actually repeat itself here in this one. And it's a difficult one to call, honestly. Part of me is saying Ospreys really should win it, because, Dragons haven't really produced that many wins at all in recent seasons, but there's still a chance there for Dragons. And I'm maybe going to go a little bit against the grain here and predict a Dragons win in that one. Okay, on to then the final game, or the final 2 games, should I say, of the weekend. And they're both 7:45 kickoffs on Saturday. The first one is Munster versus Connacht, so an Irish derby there. And this one is in Thomond Park. And, you have Munster, gone 4 from 4 so far this season. Started off with a decent performance away to Scarlets, winning by 13 points. I think that was 26-13, if memory serves. Then, playing against Cardiff the week after, bit of a scrappy win there. Maybe Cardiff feel like maybe they should have gotten, more out of that game than they did, but Munster got the win. And then again, completely outplayed by Edinburgh, but an Edinburgh team who got 4 yellow cards in the game, and Munster, found a way to win. And that's been the great thing about, I think, this Munster team this year, is that they've had good performances, and they've had, that ability, even when they're not playing well, to win games. And that combination is, very scary for opposition, because it means you've got a team that feels like they're never going to be beaten in a game. and you've got to really get out to a massive lead against them to kind of break that. And nobody's been able to do that. So they beat Edinburgh by a point. And then last week, then they produced their best performance of the season. And I think the best performance of the season so far in that comprehensive 31-14, shellacking of Leinster there at Croke Park. Absolutely outstanding in the game. Apart from maybe the opening 15 minutes where Leinster were on top, afterwards all Munster, and they fixed their line-out problems, which for the other 3 rounds of the season was a major issue for them. Hugely aggressive in defence, looking really slick in attack. Crowley looking like he's playing out of his skin at the minute. Tyke Byrne back to his best. Gavin Coombs coming off the bench with something to prove. You got Farrell, who's just earned a call up to the Ireland squad on the back of that performance, scoring that brilliant try. Great hands. When Crowley chipped the ball over, flicks it between 2 Leinster would-be catchers of the ball, and then collects the ball on full stride to go in for a try. But his performance all the way through the game, his threat, ball in hand, his offloading ability, his ability to spot where the space is, but also where his support is as well. Brilliant there too. And so many good performances from them in that game. And again, got to be absolutely full of confidence. I'm sure part of it, part of the motivation for that game would have been that so many Leinster players being picked in the Ireland squad ahead of Munster players who've been performing pretty well. Then you look at Connacht, start the season well, beat Benetton at home in the opening round and look pretty good. And again, they're under new guidance with Lancaster in there, Stuart Lancaster, who really seems to have an affinity for Irish rugby, from his time at Leinster. But I think he's well respected across Irish rugby, and I think is going to do great things at Connacht. But then next week, then they go away to Cardiff, and in fairness to them, they did well to get themselves a lose bonus point. In the game, most of the game, just 1 score behind. Cardiff then stretched out right before the end to what looked like deny them a losing bonus point, and then Connacht come up with a score that made sure that they did get the bonus point that I think their play deserved. And then last week, then they had the 1-point defeat against the Bulls, where we had the Josh Murphy getting that 20-minute red card for striking Vessels in the face. Since I believe it hasn't been announced, but I've seen on X and a few other places where Vessels may have actually gotten a lengthy ban based on what happened in that game, where Murphy claimed that he'd made contact with his groin area, and that's why he hit him. But again, as I said during the game, feel sympathy for the officials, because they can only punish what they can see, and all they saw was Josh Murphy, hitting Vessels in the face. But still, it would, overall, I felt like the Bulls had, the better performance and deserved to edge the game anyway. And then obviously Connacht had that game against Scarlets called off as well. And, that might be something that, Connacht will look back on later in the season and really regret that it was called off, because you got Scarlets at the moment, bottom of the league, no points, in really poor form. And, now probably would have been a great time to play them. It's possible by the time that game is rescheduled that Scarlets have found themselves a bit of form and, it doesn't go Connacht's way. But in this one, going away to Munster, they've had close games against Munster in recent years, so I don't think they're going to have much fear going to Thomond Park. But Munster, again, they're in that ominous form of, even when they're not playing well, they can still find the scores to win the game. So I've got to back a Munster winning that, and for Munster to go 5 from 5. On to then the final game of the round, and that is Cardiff versus Edinburgh. 7:45 kickoff on Saturday. This one is at Cardiff Arms Park, and you have Cardiff who've had a very good start to the season, 3 out of 4 for them. Started with that, winning against the Lions by 13 points. Then the loss against Munster, where again they probably felt like they could have won that game. Then they bounced back and they beat Connacht, and then they beat the Dragons last week as well. So a lot of games kind of other than the first game against the Lions, the other 3 games have finished within 1 score, whether they're winning or losing the game. So they're used to tight games at this stage. And then Edinburgh started off, lost away to Zebre, which would definitely have been a knock to their confidence. Then they have the game against Ulster called off, and then they come back then, go away to Munster and produce a really good performance. And I said it, in the review of that game, that they'll play worse than that and they'll win games this season. They were really good. Discipline obviously wasn't good. 4 yellow cards is just unacceptable. And Munster scored 3 of the 4 tries during yellow card periods as well. So, definitely got it. Something that they've got to fix in terms of discipline. And then they beat Benetton comprehensively at home last weekend. So they got their first win on the board. And now again, it's about, can you back that up and get a second win on the trot? Cardiff are the ones who are on a little bit of run, 2 wins on the bounce. But both teams have won their last game, so both will have some kind of confidence coming into this. But looking at it, it's another difficult one to call, because you would say Cardiff at home, they've got an edge, but it's rare we've seen Cardiff go on a real run of wins as well. So then that kind of leads you to maybe edging towards Edinburgh. But I'm going to go for a Cardiff win in this one. And for Cardiff to go into the November break for the internationals, probably in the top 4 in the URC, which would really be amazing for them. And then it's about, as we talked about them last season, which they couldn't do, and maybe they can do it this year, is can they keep that momentum going through the rest of the season? Okay, so that is the preview for this weekend's games. Let me know what you think down in the comments.